And first thing I want to share with you, make sure everybody understands where we're at, where we're going. First thing I want to bring up is our assignment schedule or the guide. You can see we're clearly now in week 14. Research paper is due. It needs to be submitted sometime during this physical week. The last day, I think, is the 15th. We can see that date. Right here. It's our 15th. So make sure everything is submitted prior to that time. Next week, we're covering chapters 21 and 22. There is homework for those two chapters, but I'll tell you in advance, those two chapters are not part of the final test. Chapters 21 and 22 cover some materials that I think is of interest if you're looking at advancing your study in economics, micro or macro, which means you're going to have to go in the intermediate. These are chapters that will be of importance to you. So I'll answer any questions anybody may have on chapters 21 and 22. But just remember, it's not part of the final grade. The only homework chapters that are being graded are chapters 1 through 19. Probably into this week, first of next week, I'm going to open up everything that's going to be covered on test 3. That means I'll open chapters 13 through 20 and leave them open until the end of the semester. And if you have any questions or concerns about your scores and everything there, I can take care of it. Just let me know and I'll work with you. I want everybody to pass the class. It's too much paperwork to fail somebody. So let's get everybody to get everything done and let's get through this class. Also, for the end of this week, there's going to be another opportunity for you to improve your score. I won't go any deeper than that, but just be attentive to the announcements. And if you have any questions about the announcement that comes out at the end of this week, just let me know. But I will give everybody a chance to improve their final score, and that will happen at the end of this week. Any questions about the timeline and where we're going from here and what is going to be covered from this point forward? Assume there's no questions. Let me. Close the door on my alarm. So let's start looking at the chapter. Today we're going to look at chapter 19. And what this chapter deals with is earnings and discrimination. In earnings, there's several things we have to look at and understand. One is the supply of the number of workers available to do the task will bring the value of their labor down. If we don't have but one person performing that activity, and it's a significant activity that everybody wants, their wage is going to be higher because of basic supply and demand. I don't even know how many different occupations there are in the U.S. and occupation titles and levels of responsibility. So we're going to always see some variations in income and so forth based on years of service, expertise, the number of workers, etc. Now, if two people go into the same job with the same experience and everything else, and they're paid at different rates, that can be a problem. That is a problem. If you're the business owner or the head of the division, once those two individuals find out they're having differences in pay, then you have problems in the workforce. And that's not your job. Your job is to build things and do things as efficiently as possible. That is one of the situations where you'd actually put a barrier between productivity and what needs to be done. So when we look at earnings and discrimination, we're going to look at a lot of different variables that are involved. Some legal, some illegal. If they're illegal, you shouldn't be doing it. In this chapter, how do wages different with different job characteristics? How do people with more education earn higher wages? Why are wages sometimes above their equilibrium values? Why is it difficult to measure discrimination? What might the market solve the problem of discrimination? And when might it not? So we're going to look at a lot of different variables in here. Now, in this area, we're looking at occupations 2018, chief executive officers, and I imagine this is in thousands. Well, that's weekly earnings. Chief executives, both sexes 2291, men 2488, women 1736. Lawyers, we can see the discrimination there. Physicians and surgeons, we see differences there. But it could be the field of studies that they choose or the medicine that they choose. With lawyers, the field of law they want to work in. Is it contracts or is it labor law? Is it workman's comp? Is it social security? Is it criminal or etc.? Architects and engineers, the gap is not quite as large. Financial managers, it is higher. Registered nurses, secondary teachers, counselors, retail salespersons, and waiters and waitresses. So if we look at this, we can see that on just doing averages, based on just that group of jobs, there's about a 23.32% gap in gender. Now we can do the same calculations with race. Probably do the same thing with nation, if they immigrate from Europe or Mexico or Venezuela or whatever, we can start doing some math and calculating the numbers in the gaps. But this is one we hear about quite a bit. And also wage gap in race as well. In a competitive market, especially when it's a competitive market for labor, individuals will be paid based on the value of the marginal product of labor. We looked at that last week, VMPL. If the value of the marginal product of labor is $10, they're not going to pay anybody $11. Now, if the value of the marginal product of labor is $500, they're going to pay at least $500. So it could be in a geographic location. It could be rural, suburban, suburbs, inner cities. We can look at all of these and do the measurements. As long as we understand that the greatest amount of money that the company is willing to pay is based on the value of the marginal product of labor. But it's like anything in statistics or economics. You have to look at all the other variables around. You can't look at just a snapshot and assume that what happened today is going to happen tomorrow. Compensating differential, it could be from the all set of non-monetary characteristics of different jobs. If it's a difficult job, if it's a dirty job, if it's an unsafe job, they're going to pay more money. When I was with the airlines, I had cruising mechanics that they were designated as my travel team. And at a moment's notice, they had to be willing to pack everything they had and leave. And they did not come back until the airplane came back to either the maintenance facility or back in service. Sometimes I'd be gone for 3 days in a row. They'd work out in the cold on the ramps or out in the getting sun or at night with lights. They'd work 24/7 until the lights were done. There was enough sun out there that they actually rotate shifts. Now, if you just work day shift mechanic and you just got your sheet when you came in at 7 in the morning and you punched out at 5:30, you didn't get the same pay rate. Because what those individuals did, they left, it was a difficult job, they got premiums for it. We paid premiums for night shift versus day shift. So there was a lot of things involved. They talk about the coal miners who paid more than other workers, similar education levels, because it's a difficult job, it's a high risk job. Here they talk about night shift workers paid more than day shift to compensate the lifestyle disruption. I had individuals that loved night shift. They absolutely loved it. If they said that when they went to go out to eat or whatever, there was nobody there. Everybody else was at work. But I had individuals that were working night shift that I had to move to day because they couldn't stay awake all night. Everybody's different. That individual could not stay awake at night. Caught him several times asleep in baggage compartments, and he was in the wrong place. He ended up being a very good mechanic during the day, but he didn't work well at night. Now, if we look at median weekly earnings, and this is from the second quarter, 2019, age 25 and higher. So this should eliminate the high schools and a lot of the college part-time working. Less than high school degree is $588 a week. High school diploma $751. Some college or associate's degree. So if you go to a four-year institution and you do not complete your studies at the four-year institution, this is where you're going to fall between a high school diploma and some college. I tell all students, if you're close to graduating from JCC when you transfer, and you only need one or two classes, maybe an art or a science or something like that, and you still have to take it at the four-year institution, when you complete those classes, send them back to JCC, and then JCC will issue an associate's degree. And at least you've accomplished that much. That way, if you get some family emergency or something else happens along the way, and you have to drop out of school or get a job, and at least you have something. Because there is statistical evidence that even an associate degree earns more than a basic high school diploma. Now, a bachelor's degree only, you can see the big jump. You see about 200, a little under 100 to the associates. Once you go to the bachelor's degree, we see about a $500 shift per week. And the same thing with advanced degrees, we see about a $350 jump per week. So the education levels makes a big difference. It doesn't mean that everybody drops out of high school is going to be working with 588. People that drop out of college are only going to earn $849. Bill Gates dropped out of college. He did quite well. So this is just the average. Now there's going to be people that earn less. There's going to be people that earn more. It's the same thing with the bachelor's and advanced degrees. If you get an advanced degree, so you get a PhD in tuba, you're probably not going to be earning at this level to start. Because there's not a whole lot of demand for tuba players with a PhD. So just keep that in mind when you start looking at your career options. There are a lot of excellent degrees that lead to financial happiness is a word that comes to mind, but it's not always a motivator. When we're looking at money, it's not always a demotivator, but it does affect your standard of living. Human capital. In the past, when you go back to the scientific method of management and designing of work, it was all, they'd run experiments to see what was the best shovel, what was the best route to set up this assembly line, what were the physical characteristics needed for somebody to perform the task. Like you're shoveling coal. If you're 6 foot and 140 pounds, you're probably not really suited for that. So in that time frame, they focused on more of the process than the people that were within it, because they just considered the people that were involved in the production of these goods as just like if they bought a hammer or a new saw or a new anvil or whatever. I taught occupational health and safety classes, and one of the examples I gave to the students was I told them to picture that they're in the Wild West around 1880, 1890, and just pretend that they are the blacksmith in town. And they're blacksmith because their father was a blacksmith, their grandfather was an iron worker or whatever. Automobiles hadn't been created. There was still a lot of demand for those services. So let's say we had a fire in the facility. I had a list of about 20 items that were inside that barn, including the 2 helpers that the blacksmith had working for him that were in the back of the building. His horses, saddles, etc. And I asked the students to tell me what order they would save those items. And everybody went to the people in the back first. But I explained to them, in that time frame, that blacksmith, they're going to focus on their property. They can get out. There was no consequences if there was no survival of those people in the back. They would just put up another sign, need a hard worker, help board horses, etc. So the only way that they would wake them up is if they were sure that they were going to help him or her save their products, their saddles, their horses, and their tools. Things have changed. There was something called a Hawthorne experiment that took place in, I think it was in GE. I think that was their facility. And what they were doing was turning the lights up and down to find that perfect lighting level to increase productivity. Same thing, they're looking at the process, not the individuals on the process that are performing the jobs. They turned the lights down, they had control groups and everything. The main group they were doing experiments on, they turned the lights down or turned the lights up, the people's productivity went up. They turned it up a little higher. Productivity went up, but it was going up everywhere. Then they started turning the lights down. Productivity still went up. They turned the lights down until there was barely any lighting at all in the building. And the productivity was still up. And it just blew their hypothesis out of the water. We just didn't understand. And at that time, it was all based on scientific method. Then they started talking to the workers and they said, you know, what's going on? You turn the lights up and the productivity goes up, turn them down, they go up. And the worker said, we just thought you cared. That's when management and psychology and all other fields started looking at the human component and the value the human applies to the workplace. If you're running a transmission shop, if you hire somebody that has 20 years experience working on transmissions, you're going to pay them more than another worker that is with 2 or 3 years. You're adding value to that, or that individual is bringing additional value into your company. They should be able to perform the task quickly. They should be able to work on a lot of different types of transmissions. They've seen a lot of problems in the past that they can fix quite easily. They know little tricks and have tooling to make some intricate changes on the vehicles. So experience counts. People count. Education counts. That's the reason we see a wide range between no high school and advanced degrees, because it does matter. The airlines, we paid for college classes or community college classes, either one. As long as you scored a C or R, we were good. And we even paid for continuing ed classes. I had a lot of mechanics that they wanted to take firearms manufacturing or building. And that helped them with metallurgy and working with different types of metals and stressors and so many other things, dealing with those weapons. But if somebody wanted to take pottery, if nothing else, it just calms them down. They get to work with their hands, eye-hand coordination, all that good stuff. Everything has value. So when you were told by your parents and your teachers that you needed to get an education if you wanted to meet your life expectations, they were right. And we can see it just based on these numbers. It's been studied, it's been measured. You're not going to be exactly at 1561 with an advanced degree, like I said. It's all based on what experience you have, what education you receive. And when they started looking at human capital and actually placed a value on it, it made a big difference in the workforce. Now, I guarantee you the person that only has a couple of years experience wants just as much as the person that has 20 years. I think that's only fair. They say they do the same job, the same job title. But there is something there that I don't consider discrimination. It's expertise. In 5, 10 years, that young man or young woman should be making exactly what another individual's making. But it doesn't happen overnight. Now, in asking the expert, one of the leading reasons for rising U.S. income inequality over the past 3 decades is that technology change has affected the workers in some skill sets differently than others. We have seen a huge shift in demand for engineers. And we see all the big tech companies begging for more H-1 visas so they can bring in engineers from China, Indonesia, India. and normally they're coming in at higher wage rates. Now, what does happen is it decreases the value of an engineer if you complete your studies in the U.S. and you hope to get a job in the U.S. because of the additional numbers of engineers entering the workforce. It does diminish the wage somewhat. It's not going to take it to minimum wage, but you will see some changes occur. And you can see that 88% of the economists agree with this statement. 4 disagree, 8 are uncertain. We've had an increased demand for advanced skill levels. We've seen more in international trade. So we'll see an increase in demand for workers. All of this affects income. If you're in a high demand market, you're going to get paid more than you would if you're in a market where there's no jobs there for you. Okay? Increase in value of skills, we can see what has happened. When you look at it, high school, no college, we see we see losses in annual income. Both for men, but on the college level, we see an increase even higher. Now with women, we see totally opposite on the lower end. Individuals with high school, no college, there was actually an increase, and there was an increase with the college graduates. But it's nowhere near the numbers we were looking at for the men that graduated. So we still have that gender wage gap. Now, when we look at say wage discrimination, if you've got the skills of LeBron James or Michael Jordan or you look at NASCAR, you have individuals there. I think it was Elliott just won. If you have additional skills or natural ability that takes you over and above others, you're going to earn more money. And you look at the demand for NFL tickets and the revenues of the NFL, that's what builds up that salary. If you got a 100,000 seat stadium and you bring in a player that brings in 20,000 people, additional people buy the tickets or get season tickets, you'll be willing to pay them quite a bit. The natural ability is huge. And it has nothing to do with educational attainment. It's just natural ability or a willingness to do whatever is necessary to get from point A to point B. So the effort also counts. A chance. You can see some occupations become obsolete. Look at the farrier, the blacksmith that I was talking about around 1890. They had no idea that their child was not going to be a blacksmith. Their grandchild was not going to be a blacksmith. They didn't see the car coming. No pun intended. But their occupation became obsolete. Now, there's still individuals that perform those tasks. And because there's a small number of performing the tasks, they can ask for greater funds for performing those tasks. Ability, effort, and chance. You can win the lottery. You could be in line for a big inheritance check. That's just chance. Now, ability makes a big difference. If you're an excellent programmer, you will find a job. If you're a very hard worker or you're very good working with people, you'll find a job. they are looking for those type qualities in the workforce. If there's any question of your ability or your effort to do the job, the wages are going to be much lower. Now, like I said, they're difficult to measure, hard to quantify. There's so many variables involved. Location, with the airlines, when I had applications come in, I had them go through my secretary first before they went to HR. If they checked that box, not willing to relocate, it was thrown in the trash. If you're going to work with airlines, part of it is travel and movement. It didn't mean that they were going to move every week if they got hired. It just means if they're working in one facility and I expand another facility and I need workers there, there's a possibility that they may have to move. Research, I haven't mentioned bedroll. We did some studies on attractiveness and found that attractive people make 5% more than average looks, and average looking people have 5 to 10% more than below average. And the results were similar for men and women. Is that discrimination? Is that something we can measure? Obviously, they did measure. And when we look at the benefits of beauty and the interpretation determines productivity and wages, attractive worker more value to the firm. Reported beauty, indirect measure of other abilities, like your dress, your hairstyle, your personal demeanor, and everything. If you're very involved with that, the employer says, well, if they're that attentive to those characteristics, they will be just as attentive to the task that I give them in the job. So they look at it as a control issue. An individual has their life under control. Is that true? Probably not. That's a very subjective statement, but if that's what they believe, they will pay a premium for it. Now, let's look at this. You spend 4 years studying at the world's best university, but must keep your attendance there a secret. Where you get an official degree from the world's best university, but cannot actually study there. Which you think would enhance your future earnings more? I would say the official degree will get you in the door quicker. Would I like to have a degree from Harvard? Yes, it opens up a lot of different doors. But it didn't work out to go to Harvard or Yale or any other institution. So if you have to keep it a secret and you have a degree, I mean, that's going to weigh heavily, because if they see Harvard or Yale or something like that, it does open doors. Now, does it mean that you will not be successful? It doesn't mean that. I know a number of individuals that say they chose NC Central Law School, Duke Law School, or UNC Chapel Hill, or Campbell, or Wake Forest. Well, they may have come in at a deficit. They didn't come in with all the excitement that somebody would if they were coming in from Duke. But I do know some individuals that went to NCCU that have done very well for themselves. Because once you get in, the effort that you put in and your ability will come to the surface. If it turns out that that person from Harvard was just lazy and thought the degree would get them through their career, you'll find out very quickly it doesn't work. unless daddy or mama owns the company or the law firm. It's like a lot of universities use the SATs and as part of the acceptance process. Statistically, there hasn't been a strong relationship found between the SAT scores and college performance. Same thing with LSAT and law degrees, GMAT with medical. So when we look at how the industry and the colleges work, they have to have something to narrow the field. Duke's Law School or medical school is probably going to have 20,000 applicants for 200 slots. So one way of thinning out everyone is to say we'll only consider if you're in the 95th percentile of your SATs or your LSAT or GMAT. Are very talented people left out? Absolutely. But they have to find a way to narrow the field. The same thing with hiring individuals. Like I said, with the aircraft mechanics, anytime the applications came in and the box was checked, not willing to relocate, that narrowed the field, reduced it by about 50%. Now, if the individual called me up and asked, why they weren't considered and so forth, I'd ask them if they checked that box. And if they said yes, so that's the reason you weren't considered. You can resubmit, and as long as that box isn't checked, we'll consider you. So you have to have some way to sort things out. Policy implementation, increasing general education attainment would not affect wages. We have the superstar phenomenon. We have individuals with great public appeal and astronomical incomes. We can look at Zuckerberg and Gates and Bezos and others. They were superstars. They were innovators. Bezos started out in the garage. Apple started in the garage. Macintosh. Now, the rise is every customer in the market wants goods supplied by the best producer. If you prove you're the best producer of goods, they're going to want to buy your products. That's part of what makes them a superstar. Minimum wage laws. We talked about that. We talked about with the minimum wage laws. Who works for minimum wage? Remember when we looked at it earlier when we were looking at price controls. With price controls, we saw a situation where if we let me clear this one. Remember we had minimum wage. Q&P. The demand for workers, the supply of workers. You remember the roles were reversed. Businesses are demanding your services, and you are the supplier of your labor. And at this point, if we're looking at minimum wage and we're looking at unskilled workers, this is the wage rate that at market equilibrium. Now, there are individuals that may be able to, or willing to work for less. There may be businesses willing to pay more. But this is equilibrium. Now, with minimum wage, because you have to remember, we looked at that the data that they showed us earlier in this presentation, and they were only counting individuals 25 years of age or older. So they were excluding a lot of these individuals in unskilled workers. If they have the expectation to earn more money, so if the price of minimum wage is above equilibrium, now we got a lot of people that want to work for that wage. All these people want to enter the marketplace. The business is going to say, no, thank you. You're going to find a better way. So when we're looking at minimum wage, we have to be very careful. We have to understand who's paying, who's working at minimum wage, which is a very small percentage of workforce. That's 2.5% earning less than minimum wage. Most of those are part-time workers. Most of them live in households that have incomes in excess of $100,000 a year. So when we look at minimum wage, we have to be very careful, because I think I mentioned when we were looking at it before, about the tech executive that said that increasing the minimum wage is a blessing to change over to artificial intelligence. So if they increase the minimum wage rate, and you're, say, a cashier at McDonald's and taking orders, they're going to have to make a decision, cost-benefit analysis. Do you have to be there? Or can we just put a kiosk in there and somebody that smiles and hands out their bags or plates of food? Businesses have to make that decision, and when they do, client demand will fall. We have deadweight loss that occurs, or welfare costs that occur in the marketplace. The minimum wage has a big impact, especially increasing the minimum wage. Now, the unions really want that minimum wage to go up, because their salaries are, a lot of times, are minimum wage plus. So there's an increase in minimum wage, it's an automatic increase for them as well, because it's tied or linked directly to their contract. Efficiency wages. These are above equilibrium wages paid by firms to increase worker productivity. Now, if they start paying that money out, that extra money, and there's no increase in productivity, I guarantee you that some people will be leaving. Now, some companies may be paying higher wages just to decrease turnover, increase effort, or attract higher quality job applicants. I knew in the airlines that my biggest competition was the majors. They were offering about a 50% increase over what I was paying for my mechanics. And the mechanics always looked and said, well, yeah, I can leave here and go to the airlines and I can earn X amount of money, or 50% more than I'm earning here. The problem was, where they were going to move to, there was an increased cost of living. A lot of them didn't take into consideration. It was very difficult. But if my turnover was getting high, I'd have to pay more money. That's the only way to keep the workers, especially if they perceive that the jobs and the environments are equal. And sometimes what will happen when we increase those wages, we'll see a lot of people that want to stick around that probably be better off if they went to another company or found another occupation. So we end up with a surplus of labor or unemployment as those wages get higher and higher. In each case, identify the worker who would earn more and use the concept of this chapter and explain why. The best doctor on the planet, or one of the best actors on the planet. I would say I'd rather pay the best doctor and pay them more, because there's a large supply of doctors compared to some fields, but someone that is a leader in their field, it definitely decreases the number. A trucker who hauls produce or a trucker who hauls hazardous material. The individual that carries hazardous material is going to receive a premium, or they should receive a premium. A college graduate or an equally intelligent, capable high school graduate. A college graduate is going to get more. Someone who graduated university with a 3.7 or someone who graduated the same university with 2.4. That's only if the business requests transcripts. A lot of them, all they want to do is know what you did. Did you start the program? Did you finish the program? And receive a diploma. If we look at this, we got the superstar phenomenon. This applies to the doctors. They're both the best in the field. Now, who's going to make more? Flip a coin. Probably the person who's going to make more will be the actor, but the doctor, I would believe, will deserve equal or greater pay. We talk about the compensating differences or hazards or risk. That's what we dealt with on the truckers, a college graduate on equal intelligence or capable high school. That's that theory of education, signaling. And here we're looking at the human capital theory of education. The higher GPA reflects rate of learning. When you apply to four-year institutions from JCC, they're going to look at GPA. They may also look at all the classes you've taken. If you're going into law school, you got to show all the clubs you were a part of, etc. So not only did you have a strong GPA, but you were big into social activities outside of that. That means you were a very good planner, had the capacity to perform multiple tasks at one time. Is it an absolute measure of success? No, but it is something that can separate you from others. Now, discrimination, offering different opportunities to similar individuals, only different by race, ethnic group, sex, age, or other personal characteristics. We're talking about the beauty factor. When we look at the white males, full-time, earn 23% more than white females, 35% black and African males, and 23% less than Asian males. Now, we really need to dig deeper into the data. Geographic location, job opportunities, all of those make a huge difference. If you go to northeastern North Carolina around Bertie, Martin County, you have a high school dropout rate in the 20 percentile, and you have poverty rates, 20 to 30% of the population. You have a company that dominates all the workforce in that general area, hiring or being indirectly providing jobs for about 50% of the population. All those variables in play, their wage rates can be much lower. When you see someone come out of those communities and they get their degrees, they tend to leave those communities. And it doesn't go back and help. But in those areas, we have educational problems, we have infrastructure problems, But if we had the educational system in place in the Eastern North Carolina that would support educational growth and expansion, the roads will come in. That will happen. But it's not genetic. The system is not functioning the way it's intended. Now, like I said, there's many explanations. Is it a company going out and saying, we're just here to exploit the labor force because they have a large percentage of unskilled workers with less than a high school degree? I mean, some jobs that's possible. Because companies will leave for cheaper labor overseas as long as they can reduce their costs. Like I said, discrimination, human capital, quality of education, job experience, compensating differentials, kinds of work, willing to do working conditions. If you live in Johnson County, and I've talked to individuals and students in the past, they would say, well, I'm not willing to relocate for a job, period. I live in Johnson County. My parents lived in Johnson County and died, and my grandparents died in Johnson County, and they just go on and on about the lineage of Johnson County. The problem is they don't need to get upset. They become a heating and air tech that only works in Johnson County and try to compare their salaries to someone that lives in Johnson County and works in Raleigh and Chapel Hill and bigger jobs, etc. Relocation is key. If you're not willing to relocate, it's very difficult. Now, if you live in Raleigh and there's high demand for your skills and you're not willing to relocate, that's different. But if your company decides to move because of searching for different technologies or different skill sets, you could be in trouble. Now, differences in educational attainment. In 2017, men aged 25 and older, 34% of white population had a college degree, 24% for black population. And let's look at the quality of public schools. With North Carolina is a good example. When we look at the public school system and we look at the Constitution of North Carolina, everybody's supposed to have a fair and equitable access to education. But you cannot tell me that the educational opportunities that a student has in Wake County is the same for the students in Bertie and Martin County or down toward Lumberton or Western North Carolina or even the Virginia-North Carolina border. The school systems are overtaxed, not as far as monetarily, but they're trying to produce the same output with much less as far as inputs. If you're a young teacher coming out of college, you don't want to go live in Bertie or Martin County. You want to live near Raleigh or Charlotte or Greensboro, where there's more opportunity and things to do. And the way we have our school system divided up, we have at least 100 school districts, and they all have to come up with their own capital. They get state funding per student, but the buildings and the technologies and all that are not available because the tax base isn't that strong. You see similar things going on in inner cities. Historically, public schools in predominantly black areas have been lower quality than public schools in predominantly white areas. Still true. But it's until we change the system, we can't expect a different outcome. It's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. If you look at the poorer counties, You know, there's they can send some more money down there, but there's so many deficiencies. Is it going to actually impact the quality of education? The system has to change. It's not something that you can just spend more money and get out of it. Now, we have job experience that can be a differential as far as income. Women are more likely to interrupt their careers and raise children. True. Men have done the same thing, not to the same degree. But if you're making, let's say, if you want to see the true picture of poverty and the road to poverty, if you're a single mother without a high school education, you are in trouble. The probability that you're going to remain in and below the poverty level is very high. We had many close friends that have come out of that and have gone from being a single mother, no high school. They went and got their GED, then they got their associates, and they got a bachelor's, and they got their master's. And they're doing quite well. But if the job opportunities aren't there and the education is not available to, it is very difficult. Population age between 25 and 44, 75% of women are in the labor force, 90% of the men. And the actual population, there's more men than women in the workforce or available to the workforce. And we see that number exists. Compensating differentials, sometimes they don't choose to do the same work. But if you're a teacher, regardless of gender, race, anything, it's to be based on experience, or that's the way it's set up. But the problem is, that's a large group of people, largely dominated by women, and that actually keeps those numbers down as far as equity is concerned. Men are more likely to be truck drivers, but you can go to JCC as a woman and you can get your CDL. And so they've had a lot of good drivers leave JCC, female drivers. That's what they love to do. But it's dominated by men. So this is, if you haven't seen or heard Freakonomics, the actual movie, they get into this as well, where Bertrand and Sindel, they sent out the applications that different names on it. The experience was everything was equal. They got more callbacks for the one that was perceived to be white than the one that was perceived to be African American. It should not happen. If you're in business to make money, you just want the best people there. And name, physical appearance should make absolutely no difference. If they make that company better, you want them there, regardless. I've told many of the students in management and economics, I don't care if you're round, squeak, green, hair all over your body, and you roll from point A to point B. If you make my company better, you stay. If you are an employee of mine and you're giving that person a hard time because they're green, short, round, and roll from point A to point B, you go away. That was my philosophy anytime I was in management. My objective when I was in airlines to have safe airplanes on time. And if you did anything that impeded with that process, you went away. I didn't care if you were a crew leader or director or what. If you did anything to impede that, you went away. And I had to get rid of some people just to prove that. It made a huge difference on the impact of work satisfaction and productivity. When those individuals were gone, it made a huge difference. But this study shows it still occurs. For economics, they had the same thing occur. Here, I'm not even trying to pronounce his last name because it probably sounds like a cookie, but they had resumes with English, Indian, Pakistani, Chinese, Greek names. They found discrimination. English sounding names, 39% more callbacks. The other 4 were much lower. Even the fictional applicant had an English sounding first name and a Chinese last name. They received beneficial treatment or there was a perceived value placed on them just because of their name. If you ever get in a position where you're dealing with hiring and going through resumes and everything else, I just assume they mark out the name, date of birth, and just tell me what degrees they've earned and see their writings. That's what makes the difference. That's what should make the difference. I did have a policy in the airlines. If you sent me an application with a picture, it was thrown away. Because we didn't hire anybody based on looks. Now, discrimination by employers, you can look at that duopoly, or where 1 or 2 industries control the entire market for jobs. Yeah, they are going to be paying less than what somebody would make if they were in Raleigh or someone else that was outside of their purview. Now, if we're in a competitive market, then if I offer lower wages, I have to expect that I'll get the unskilled workers. I will train them for somebody else and then allow them to go. If I'm not going to pay the market rate, I can't expect the person to stay with me. I shouldn't be angry when they leave. So that's what it's saying here. The market is the solution, because if you're truly a business to make money, your objective should be a profit motive, not some social experiment or prejudice that you may have. If I run a business and I discriminate against workers and won't hire certain workers or whatever, I need to face the consequences when the consumers of the same characteristics refuse to come in my door. And if I'm a publicly traded company, and I shouldn't be surprised if my shareholders don't have a little meeting to get rid of me because I would allow discrimination to expand so far. When we look at life today with the internet, it's so easy to get caught up in that cycle. Real or perceived, you have to be extremely careful. Demand for female workers increase, demand for male workers fall. Here in the market failure, which is what it was when we shut down for COVID, we saw it hit men harder than it hit women. Men were losing their positions at a greater rate than women. You can look at some of the fields that were dominated by women versus men, and you can see the essential workers versus the non-essential workers. Now, is that something we'll see every time we have a recession? Not necessarily, but it's very possible. We'll see some variation of it. But when we shut down the economy, it made a huge impact. It had nothing to do with sex, gender, race, anything. It was essential versus non-essential. And it hit the men harder than it did women. So it showed that a lot of them were not essential workers. Now, discrimination by consumers. Now, I was talking to somebody the other day about issues with customers. The old adage is the customer is always right. It's not true. I've dealt with customers that have actually been like a cancer. You have to deal with that. And you can't let it tear your business down. I had an individual call me up. They called to the switchboard. My secretary got the phone call. She transferred it to me. Had no clue who this gentleman was. Never seen him before. Didn't know him. Because I had just taken over this facility. And when I picked up the phone, he was cussing at me. So I just hung up. Didn't say a word, just hung up. Secretary called back and said, he's back. Y'all got cut off. I said, no, I hung up. Because all he was doing was just cussing. So I don't have time for that. Second call did the same thing. Hung up again. Third time, he made a comment that we've been cut off. I said, no, I hung up on you. Because neither I nor any of my people need to deal with someone like you. And I told him, I was going to get his airplane finished up first, and then we get out of the facilities. I never wanted to see him again. Then he started talking bad about me, and I met him again, and he didn't know who I was. And he was telling all the other people around him how bad Thomas Martin was, and how evil I was, how big of a crook I was. And I stood there just nodding my head. And when somebody asked my name, I told them. And I won that debate. After that, I never had any problems with him. The customers are not always right. They're saying things to your employees or doing anything disrespectful, whatever. Employees need to have an avenue to tell you about it or tell someone about it, and then someone needs to take action. That's just how it should work. Now, they talk about the apartheid in the 90s in South Africa, but it was government segregation, and it was discriminatory. It had to go away. We had the early 20th century United States, so were the Jim Crow laws and so forth. That was not just in the South. There was a lot of issues in the North as well. It wasn't, ignorance was not solely placed in the South. When it came to racial discrimination, it was across the board. It's hard to get anything to work when you're isolating or demeaning any large group of people. Remember, the profit motive should be the leading guide. And you do what is necessary to keep your customers happy. as much as possible, keep your employees happy, and make a profit. You can't do that by insulting or angering different populations. In a competitive market, it'll work its way out. Now, in areas where you don't have one employer dominating the market, it's not going to be corrected easily unless it's done through government actions. Statistical discrimination, we have it arises because of irrelevant but observable personal characteristic is correlated with irrelevant or unobservable attribute. It's like if you're doing a study of cars and right turns after the right turn signal is turned on. If you decide you want to study that and you find out that as you follow the car, 98% of them, when the right turn signal comes on, the car makes a right turn. Now, sometimes they'll take a left turn, which makes all the motorcyclists in the world very leery. Some will just keep driving straight. But a large majority of them will turn right. So we have found a correlation, a strong relationship between the right turn signal and the right turn. The problem is we can't assign causality to it, because even though it's just about a perfect fit, it has a strong R square, which is the relationship. It can be positive or negative from 1 to -1. 1 being an absolute positive relationship, -1 absolute negative relationship. So when you do one, the other happens. So you could say that on the left side, if you were measuring, see how many left turns were made with people making right turn signals, that would be a high negative. But statistically, you can't find causation. You find relationships. And there's always something behind each action and reaction. Like I said, the turn signal did not make the car move. What made the car move to the right was the person inside the car, not the car itself. So sometimes we have to look at the data and we have to really delve into it. But if you ever go in there and you start saying X caused Y, you're out on the outer limits of what statistics can even do. Because it finds relationships, it doesn't find causation. Because all we know is what we know. We look at our environment, we know that this is the situation we live in. So when you go through this, they got some other things, but in a nutshell, make sure you go through those different theories before dealing with how people are paid differently, how discrimination, the effort, the educational theory, etc. And you'll be just fine as far as this chapter is concerned. The next 2 chapters should be some of your easiest. I had some graphs and stuff I want to show, but we'll get through this chapter fairly easily. It's not hard. It doesn't have the deep math that you see in others unless you want to create it. Any questions or concerns on chapter 19? Any questions or concerns about your research project? If there are no questions, I think it's 12:15. It's time to go. So if you've got a paper that's ready, get it submitted. The sooner the better. All right. Have a nice day.